April 25, 1945, near Halbe. A boy no older than 14 stepped out from behind a ruined wall. The Panzerfaust on his shoulder looked heavier than his body. For him, one launcher equaled one chance, nothing more. Engines grew louder on the road ahead. An American column pushed forward, Sherman's first, infantry close behind. Interrogation, U.S. 95th Infantry Division, April 1945. Children with Panzerfausts, no older than 13-14. The line confirming what the soldiers saw that morning. For the boy, 30 meters equaled a breath and a death together. Men behind him froze, watching the small figure stand alone. None moved, none spoke. He held the tube steady, his hands shaking only once before tightening again. One child faced steel. Effective firepower negligible. By April 1945, the Reich was collapsing. Soviet forces pressed from the east, Americans from the west. Millions fled across ruined roads, hoping to fall into U.S. hands. For him, each mile west equaled one more chance to live. Civilians carried bundles, carts dragged by horses or even children. Trains no longer ran. Villages emptied overnight. A boy in uniform stood among them, not different in age, only in the weight he carried. For him, one rifle across his shoulder equaled a chain stronger than hunger. The Volkssturm filled gaps with boys and old men. Training was measured in hours, not weeks. Allied Psychological Warfare Division, April 1945. Juveniles, exhausted, fearful of officers. Proof that obedience came more from fear than belief. For him, one shouted order equaled a heavier weight than his Panzerfaust. By spring, propaganda spoke of final victory, but numbers told the truth. 317,000 surrendered in the Ruhr pocket, a city dissolved in days. Another 17,482 surrendered on March 26 alone, an entire corps gone in one morning. For him, each figure equaled silence, men vanishing faster than he could count. The Reich still broadcast no capitulation, but radios reached fewer homes. Food disappeared, fuel disappeared, belief disappeared. For him, the world that promised eternity equaled nothing more than one collapsing wall. The Hitler Youth had once meant parades and songs. By 1945, it meant rifles, Panzerfausts, and empty eyes. More than 8 million boys had passed through its ranks before the war's end. For him, one school class equaled one firing line. The Volkssturm decree pulled anyone from 16 to 60. In practice, it pulled younger. Armbands replaced proper uniforms, school shoes carried into trenches. Allied interrogation, April 1945, we had one launcher each, one shot. Proof that for many, training lasted less than a day. For him, 1 hour of lessons equaled a sentence to fight. Names survived in records. Alfred Zeck, age 12, earned an Iron Cross for rescuing wounded. Willy Hübner, 16, stood beside Goebbels at a ceremony in March. Hans-Georg Henke, also 16, was photographed weeping when captured near Hessen. For him, every story equaled a mirror. Older boys turned into symbols, while he was just another in the line. Some units were entire youth formations. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend began with 17-year-olds, but by autumn 1944, only 600 were left combat-ready. Flak batteries absorbed 50,000 schoolboys by October. For him, one flak position equaled a classroom rewritten into a battlefield. And yet, the boy in Halbe was not a symbol on film. He was a child ordered to carry a tube that could kill a tank or kill him instead. The boy was placed in a Volkssturm detachment near Halbe. Most of the men were over 40. A few had seen the front before, many had not. For him, it meant standing in line with men who looked more like fathers than fighters. One child among dozens of exhausted adults. Weapons were mixed. A few Mausers, some Panzerfausts, a single MG-42 without spare belts. Allied report, April 1945. One launcher per man, no resupply. The statement meant that after the first shot, there was nothing left. Firepower lasted less than a minute. They had no radio contact. Officers passed rumors, not orders. Some claimed reinforcements would come. Others whispered they were already abandoned. For him, it meant watching authority dissolve in front of him. Orders became voices, not command. Rations were scarce. Bread was cut into slices so thin they barely covered a palm. Water came from ditches along the road. For him, each meal meant one more day of waiting, not fighting. It was not a defense, it was exhaustion. The detachment held a stretch of woodland broken by farmhouses. Shelling had torn gaps through the trees, and every path became a channel for armor. For him, each ruined barn equaled both shelter and trap. The land itself worked against them. The soil was wet from April rains, trenches filled with water, boots heavy with mud. Soldiers stood knee-deep, rifles balanced above the muck. Interrogation, Halbe Sector, April 1945. Foxholes collapsed under shell fire. Men moved constantly. Proof that the ground erased positions as soon as they were dug. There was no stable line. Villages near Halbe still held civilians. More than 40,000 were trapped in the pocket, hiding in basements. Each house equaled a risk. Behind one door, a family. Behind another, an enemy. For him, the street he once knew became another front. American AR noted, columns stalled by wrecked bridges and forest cover. Tanks avoided the deepest woods, but every lane forward was checked by scouts. For him, the landscape gave only short delays, never real defense. Each tree meant seconds, not safety. The ground consumed strength faster than bullets. Mud, wrecks, and ruins left soldiers without clear lines. For him, terrain meant fatigue, not protection. It was not an advantage. It was collapse. The officers gathered the men in a ruined farmhouse. The words were short. Positions must be held. For the boy, it meant no escape. One order erased every other choice. General Walter Model had telegraphed days earlier, no capitulation. That message still echoed through the ranks. Interrogation, April 1945. We were told to stand even if ammunition ended. Proof that the command was absolute. The line left no space for retreat. Men listened, but few believed. They knew units around them were gone, bridges destroyed, contact lost. For the boy, it meant facing tanks with no plan. It was not command, it was coercion. Officers repeated the same word, Endkampf, the last fight. They spoke of honor and duty, not of survival. For him, honor meant standing 30 meters from a tank with one shot. The promise was hollow. The men sat in shallow trenches cut into wet ground. Most were past 40, some closer to 60. Their faces showed more fatigue than fight. For him, honor meant standing 30 meters from a tank with one shot. The promise was hollow. The men sat in shallow trenches cut into wet ground. Most were past 40, some closer to 60. Their faces showed more fatigue than fight. For the boy, every glance at them meant he was the only one with youth left. Age was weakness here. Rations had dwindled to crumbs. Bread came in slices too thin to fill a palm. Coffee replaced by hot water from ditches. Stomachs growled louder than rifles. For him, each meal was a reminder that hunger was constant. It was not supply, it was survival. Weapons carried no promise. Mausers had 2 or 3 cartridges left, Panzerfausts 1 round each, MG-42s with no belts. Allied Divisional Log, April 1945. Ammo, 2 5 rounds per man, meaning firepower would vanish in seconds. For the boy, 1 trigger pull meant the end of his weapon, firepower negligible. Cold nights drained strength further. Soldiers wrapped themselves in coats that no longer kept them warm. Some tied scarves torn from civilian clothes. Others used blankets taken from abandoned homes. For him, 1 thin shirt beneath a coat was all he had left. Cold made the trench another enemy. Discipline broke with exhaustion. Orders were repeated, but men no longer moved fast. Some ignored commands entirely, staring into mud. For the boy, it meant seeing authority collapse as quickly as the line. It was not resistance, it was fatigue. Engines rumbled long before the first tanks appeared. The sound carried across woods and ruins, steady and heavy. For the boy, each minute of noise meant 1 tank closer. It was not background, it was threat. When the columns emerged, they filled entire roads. Sherman tanks rolled in lines, half-tracks followed, infantry marched behind. Each vehicle carried supplies his unit no longer had. For him, 1 truck equaled more bread than his detachment had seen in weeks. The scale was impossible. American reports from the Ruhr described Panzerfaust ambushes from 30-40 meters, columns briefly stalled. Proof that U.S. armor expected resistance at close range. For the boy, it meant his weapon could matter for seconds, then nothing more. 1 boy against a column. Numbers alone showed imbalance. A U.S. infantry division counted over 14,000 men. His detachment held fewer than 100. For him, 1 field meant facing what could fill a stadium. The ratio erased hope. The advance moved with discipline. Infantry covered tanks. Artillery cleared tree lines. Engineers checked bridges. For the boy, each American step equaled another meter stolen. It was not a fight. It was inevitability. He was 14, pulled from Hitlerjugend drills in a small town east of Berlin. School had ended for him the moment the Volkssturm took boys alongside men. For him, the desk became a rifle. Childhood closed overnight. His uniform was a mix of issued and borrowed. A too large coat from a relative, shoes patched with wire, an armband instead of proper insignia. For him, each piece of clothing meant improvisation, not preparation. It was not equipment, it was remains. Training lasted less than a day. Allied Report, Mar 1945. Instruction, hours, then deployment. Proof that Panzerfaust use was rushed. He learned to load, aim, fire once. For him, 1 lesson equaled a sentence. No training, only orders. He carried a folded notebook in his pocket, pages half filled with handwriting. Between words were sketches of houses, fields, trees. For him, the notebook equaled a memory of normal days. In the trench, it meant nothing. What set him apart was his size. The launcher weighed almost as much as his body. Each step with it cost more strength than he had. For him, 1 tube equaled 1 burden. It was not a weapon, it was weight. At night, he thought of his mother's kitchen, of bread still warm, of a table where he once sat with family. The trench around him smelled of mud and metal. For him, memory equaled a meal that never returned. Hunger was constant. He remembered his father, gone since the Eastern Front in 1943. The boy never knew if he lived or died. In his unit, every older man looked like a replacement. For him, absence equaled silence. Family was gone. Fear grew with every sound of engines. He counted seconds between artillery strikes, waiting for one to land closer. Allied interrogation, April 1945. Juveniles reported greater fear of officers than shells, proof that command pressure equaled more dread than enemy fire. For him, the threat stood behind as much as ahead. He thought of friends from school, most already conscripted, some already gone. Their names had faded from the roster, replaced by empty space. For him, one empty desk equaled one grave. Childhood became a roll call. Sleep came in fragments. He lay with one arm over his Panzerfaust, clutching it as if it was a pillow. For him, the tube equaled both weapon and curse. It was not comfort. It was fear. At night, he thought of bread in his mother's kitchen, meals that had once filled the table. The trench smelled of mud and cordite. For him, memory meant food no longer there. Hunger was constant. He remembered his father, reported missing on the Eastern Front in 1943. No letter came after that year. No official notice reached the family. In the unit, older men stood where a father once had. His father missing, status unknown. Fear grew with every engine sound. He counted seconds between artillery strikes, each one closer. Allied interrogation, April 1945. Juveniles feared officers more than shells, showing command pressure weighed heavier than enemy fire. Fear behind, fire ahead. He thought of friends from school, most already conscripted, many absent from the roll. Empty spaces replaced familiar names, and no one explained. For him, a missing classmate meant another death. Childhood erased by war. Sleep came in fragments. He kept one arm across his Panzerfaust, holding it through the night. The tube pressed against him like a weight. It was not comfort. It was not comfort. It was burden. The Panzerfaust was a single-shot launcher. Range was 30 to 60 meters depending on model. German manuals described it as effective against Sherman armor. For the boy, 30 meters meant standing close enough to die. One shot, one chance. Its warhead pierced up to 200 millimeters of armor. Tests showed it could kill a tank with one strike. But after firing, the tube was empty, useless in his hands. For him, it was a weapon for seconds only. Seconds, not endurance. Backblast made it more dangerous for the operator. Safety guides demanded 2 to 3 meters of clear space behind. Allied medical reports noted burns, lung damage, concussions. For the boy, alleys and cellars left no space, safety impossible. Training was minimal. Allied report, March 1945. Instruction, hours, then deployment. Proof boys had little preparation. He learned to load and fire once, never to reload. For him, training equaled minutes, knowledge absent. He carried it everywhere, heavier than his own frame could manage. At night, the tube pressed against him as he lay in a trench. For him, it was not pride, it was burden. To officers, it was propaganda. To soldiers, it was a desperate tool. To the boy, it was all he had. One tube, no future. The Panzerfaust was a single-shot weapon with a range of 30-60 meters. German manuals confirmed penetration against Sherman armor at close distance. For the boy, it meant firing almost within sight of the crew. Tube empty after one shot. Warhead data showed penetration of 140 to 200 millimeters. Enough to kill a tank, but only once. After firing, the weapon had no further use. For him, the launcher was a single disposable task. Firepower lasted under a minute. Backblast was lethal indoors, demanding 2 to 3 meters clearance. Allied medical reports listed burns, concussions, and lung damage. For him, alleys and cellars left no safe angle, no clearance, operator at risk. Allied report, March 1945. Instruction, hours, then deployment. Training reduced to minutes. He learned to load, aim, fire once. For him, no chance to practice again. Training lasted less than an hour. At night, he lay with the tube pressed against him. It weighed almost as much as his body. For him, the launcher was not pride but pressure, weapon heavier than the child. To officers, it was propaganda. To soldiers, it was a desperate stopgap. To the boy, it was survival forced into his hands. One launcher, no alternative left. Engines grew louder long before the tanks appeared. The boy pressed his ear to the frozen ground and felt vibration before sight. For him, that sound was as heavy as the machine itself. Armor advanced. Time shortened. Tracks clanked over broken pavement. He measured their rhythm, slow but steady, impossible to stop. Older men muttered counts, trying to guess how many approached. For the boy, counting meant nothing. He knew only that they came closer. Allied artillery reports noted average barrages of 15-20 shells per minute. Explosions fell in intervals that erased any thought of safety. The boy tried to cover his ears, but still marked the pattern. Shells constant, shelter scarce. Interrogation, April 1945. Infantry moved with tanks, streets filled in minutes. Trucks followed armor, unloading squads into ruined houses. The boy understood that once the street was filled, no retreat was possible. One column equaled a line erased. Engines of half-tracks joined the soundscape. Their lighter rattle mixed with tank clatter. The difference was obvious to trained ears, but even he began to recognize it. For him, each new sound meant fewer exits. Every road blocked. Shell fragments hit the walls around him. He flinched as bricks cracked, dust falling on his shoulders. Allied engineers calculated average lethal radius at 30 meters. For the boy, 30 meters equaled one breath too far. One breath. No cover. American field notes described infantry clearing alleys ahead of tanks with rifle fire. Bursts rattled in the distance before the armor moved forward again. He knew when fire started, armor was only seconds behind. Seconds counted. Escape gone. Every sound, every mechanical beat carried meaning. Tanks, trucks, rifles, shells, all layered together. The boy had no maps, no orders, only ears. For him, listening was the only tactic. Sound equaled survival time. The older soldiers gathered in a ruined cellar. Their maps were smudged with mud, useless in the dark. They argued over where the American line even stood. For the boy, their voices meant confusion, command absent, clarity gone. One sergeant demanded they hold position. Another insisted retreat was possible through nearby woods. The voices grew louder, but no one acted. For him, orders sounded like noise. Noise replaced direction. Divisional log, April 1945. No more contact with command, radio out. Confirmation they argued without higher instruction. Each man wanted to survive, but none agreed how. For the boy, it meant silence from above. Silence heavier than shells. Food was almost gone. One soldier passed around the last pieces of bread, splitting them unevenly. Some refused, saving crumbs for another hour. The boy chewed quickly, feeling nothing change. One crust, no plan. Arguments turned bitter. Some cursed officers for abandoning them, others muttered about surrender. None dared speak the word too loudly. For him it sounded like a secret not allowed, surrender spoken. Action missing. Interrogation, April 1945. Units dissolved on their own, junior leaders absent, showing disintegration at every level. For the boy, grown men had no more certainty than he did. Men older. judgment absent. Weapons lay scattered, many without ammunition. A Walther pistol passed between hands with only one cartridge left. For him, the gesture was meaningless. One bullet, no solution. In the end, the argument circled back to nothing. The cellar filled with silence broken only by distant guns. For the boy, it was worse than the noise outside. Talk finished, action absent. He waited until the arguing stopped. Then, in the silence, he spoke. His words were simple: go west, not east. The older men stared at him. For them, it sounded like madness. For him, it was the only road. The boy suggested leaving the ruined village at night. He claimed Americans were closer, safer than Soviets. Some laughed, others cursed. One sergeant shook his head. A child telling veterans where to march. Authority absent. Credibility gone. Interrogation. Volkssturmfighter, April 1945. We followed the younger ones, not officers, because they had ideas. This mirrored the moment in the cellar. The boy had a direction when others offered none. His age made the risk louder. Youth equaled defiance. He pointed at a small path behind the burned houses. He said tanks could not pass there, only men on foot. His logic was crude but clear. For the men, it was either that or the main road into artillery. One path, two outcomes. Older soldiers argued the plan would fail. Some demanded to fight, others to wait for dawn. The boy said dawn meant certain death. For him, night meant a chance even if slim. Night equaled survival odds. Food was gone, ammunition nearly empty. A Walther passed hand to hand with only one bullet. That detail reinforced his argument. They could not fight armor with one pistol round, one bullet. No defense. Divisional log, April 1945. Orders to hold received, but units dispersed. This confirmed the gap between orders and reality. In the cellar, the boy's idea filled the vacuum. His words equaled movement. Orders equaled nothing. In the end, the men fell quiet. They studied him, thin shoulders under an oversized coat, a Panzerfaust resting by his side. He did not plead, he only repeated the route. Silence held the answer. One boy spoke. Soldiers listened. The first reaction was laughter. One corporal laughed so hard he leaned on the wall. A child giving orders felt like theater. For the boy, it was humiliation, not humor. Authority denied. Then came anger. A sergeant barked that they would be shot for disobedience. His words shook the cellar more than the shelling. The boy listened without reply. Threat given. Obedience absent. Interrogation, April 1945. Some soldiers cursed at the juveniles, calling them reckless. The record echoed the scene. Men older than fathers dismissed the idea. For the boy, rejection was expected. Anger louder than logic. Others argued with each other instead of him. Should they fight or should they wait? Each voice rose, each opinion contradicted the last. For him, noise was worse than silence, debate endless, direction none. One lieutenant leaned forward, eyes tired. He did not laugh or curse. He only asked the boy to repeat the route again. For the child, this sounded like recognition. Rank silent, attention given. Weapons clicked in hands as if to remind him of hierarchy. A rifle pointed to the ground, a pistol unloaded. But the Panzerfaust in his lap carried the only real chance. One tube, one possibility. Some men shifted uneasily. They whispered to each other, unwilling to admit they considered the plan. For the boy, hesitation felt like progress. Doubt was better than denial. Doubt visible. Command fractured. In the end, silence returned. No one moved, but no one dismissed him again. The child sat still, clutching the launcher. For him, silence meant a door opening. One boy, many listeners. The cellar emptied into a ruined street. Dust hung in the air, mixed with smoke from shell impacts. The boy stepped ahead before anyone else moved. One child in front, soldiers behind. He gripped the Panzerfaust with both hands. The tube was longer than his arm span, awkward and heavy. Still, he kept it close. For him, weight equaled duty. One tube, no spare. American AAR, April 1945. Panzerfaust fired from 30 to 40 meters. Column stalled. The boy knew distance mattered. Too far and the shot was wasted. Too close and he would not survive the backblast. 30 meters equaled suicide range. The older men muttered but followed. Some lowered rifles, others just watched. None stepped forward to replace him. For the boy, their silence was agreement. Soldiers silent, child leading. He reached a corner wall, broken bricks giving partial cover. His breath came hard, fogging in the air. He rested the tube on rubble, trying to steady it. For him, cover equaled seconds. Seconds mattered. Inside the cellar he had spoken. Now outside he acted. The contrast was stark. Orders had failed, voices had argued, but the boy alone advanced. One body forward, many frozen. Some tried to call him back. One voice shouted about orders to hold. Another warned of tanks too close. He did not answer. For him, words equaled delay, delay fatal. Tracks rattled nearer. Engines drowned all other sounds. The boy leaned into the weapon, steadying for the one shot he was given. One chance, no return. The tank appeared at the end of the street. Its turret rotated slowly, scanning ruined houses. The boy steadied the tube on rubble. One target, one operator. He pulled the safety pin and set the Panzerfaust on his shoulder. The weapon was unstable, front-heavy for his size. His hands shook, but the aim stayed forward. One launcher, one risk. Allied Technical Report, 1945. Backblast 2-3 meters, lethal in confined spaces. The boy crouched near the corner, knowing bricks would shatter behind him. For him, survival meant open air. Space limited. Danger certain. The distance closed, 35 meters, then 30. Too far for safety, too close to survive the shot. Still, he held the line of sight. 30 meters equaled one heartbeat. Engines roared, steel tracks tearing pavement. Dust rose in clouds around the column. The boy's breath matched the grinding rhythm. For him, 1 second equaled the difference between life and nothing. He squeezed the trigger. The tube roared. Fire burst backward. Dust, soot, and splintered brick filled the alley. He fell to one knee but stayed conscious. Shot fired. Backblast endured. The projectile struck the Sherman's flank. A flash, then smoke poured from the side plate. The tank ground to a halt, crew scrambling to react. One hit. Column stalled. Behind him, the soldiers shouted, stunned into motion. Some ran forward, others dropped flat. The boy lowered the empty tube, coughing from dust. For him, silence after the blast meant success. Shot complete. Street held. The Sherman stopped in the middle of the street. Its engine rattled, but the tracks no longer moved. Infantry behind the tank froze in place, staring forward. One boy had stalled a column. Voices shouted in English, some ordering flanking fire, others yelling for medics. The soldiers had not expected the ambush to come from a child. For them, the scene was disorienting, shock visible, orders delayed. AR 95th Infantry Division, April 1945. Panzerfaust fired from alley, 30-40 meters, column stalled. The record matched the reality in front of them. One shot equaled minutes of paralysis. The infantry moved cautiously, rifles raised. They advanced toward the flank, checking every cellar and window. But they still looked at the small figure near the rubble. One launcher, not an army. The crew of the Sherman scrambled out, coughing from smoke. They dragged one man with burns to the ground, rolling him onto the pavement. The boy watched from cover, weapon empty. Crew wounded. Tank lost. Some GIs pointed at him, unsure if he was soldier or civilian. His oversized coat and young face confused even trained eyes. For them, the threat was unreal, target blurred, age uncertain. Others opened fire into nearby ruins, suppressing possible second shots. Grenades rolled into basements. Machine guns swept upper floors. Standard countermeasures for ambush, but out of scale for one child. Heavy response. Minimal trigger. The pause lasted less than 5 minutes, but for a column of armor it was costly. One shot forced delay, redirection, and a complete tactical reset. Minutes lost. Advance broken. The moment of shock opened a gap. The tank no longer blocked the road, and infantry hesitated. The boy lowered the empty tube. Behind him, men started to move. One pause equaled one corridor. The first to rise were 2 Volkssturm fighters. They pulled others by the sleeves, forcing them toward the western exit of the street. Hesitation turned into motion. Soldiers fled. Line broken. A lieutenant signaled with his hand, pointing to the woods beyond the houses. No shouted orders, only gestures. Noise meant death, silence meant escape. For the boy, silence worked. Movement spread. Divisional note, April 1945. Units dispersed westward without contact with higher command. The record explained what unfolded. Men no longer followed Berlin. They followed an opportunity. Orders failed. Initiative survived. The group slipped past the first houses, keeping low under collapsing roofs. No shots followed them. Americans were still regrouping around the disabled Sherman. Every second counted. 5 minutes equaled survival. Some dropped weapons to run faster. Rifles abandoned in ditches, cartridges spilled on cobblestones. For the boy, it was proof that the Panzerfaust had done more than wound steel. One tube saved 30 rifles. The path westward led into scattered woods. Thin trees gave poor cover, but enough to hide movement. In small groups they crossed open fields, bending low. Every 100 yards gained felt irreversible. Distance meant life. By the time the Americans restored order, the group was gone. Tracks turned, infantry spread into alleys, but the moment had passed. One boy's shot equaled 1 unit's survival. Escape achieved. Column delayed. Not everyone escaped in order. Some stumbled under falling beams. Others fell from exhaustion. The boy saw one man dragged by 2 comrades. One body slowed 10 others. Blood marked a pavement where a wounded soldier collapsed. His leg was torn by fragments. 2 others tried to carry him, then left him behind when fire resumed. 1 wound equaled 1 abandonment. POW statement, April 1945. Some refused to run, sitting in ruins, waiting. Records confirm the scene. Older men simply stopped moving. For the boy, it was incomprehensible. Refusal equaled certain death. American fire returned as infantry reorganized. Bursts rattled through alleys. Grenades exploded in courtyards. Those still behind walls never left. Delay equaled capture. In the rush westward, boots slipped on mud. Helmets were lost, weapons scattered. The boy clutched the empty launcher until it was useless weight. Then he dropped it. One tube abandoned, purpose complete. Some reached the tree line and disappeared into cover. Others fell on open ground, caught by bullets chasing their backs. The survivors counted fewer with each minute. Distance equaled division. The lieutenant who had raised his hand earlier disappeared in the woods. Others asked where he was, but no one knew. For the boy, leadership was gone, officers lost, child remained. By dusk, the group had thinned by half. What began as dozens crossing the street ended as scattered clusters in the forest. One escape equaled many losses. After the clash, American officers compiled notes. They described how a tank was halted by fire at close range. What caught attention was not the weapon, but the operator. For them, the operator was a child. Field log, 9th Armored Division, April 1945. Panzerfaust cruise in cellars, very close range. The note did not exaggerate. Distances were suicidal, sometimes less than 30 meters. One street equaled one ambush lane. Soldiers who advanced after the shot later testified. Some recalled the empty launcher lying beside rubble. Others remembered the small figure being pulled away by older men. One launcher equaled one lasting image. In debriefings, officers admitted confusion. They expected trained Volkssturm, not adolescents. The presence of boys with anti-tank weapons blurred categories of combatant and civilian. One face equaled a moral dilemma. APWD Summary, April 1945. Juveniles exhausted, fearful of officers. The line confirmed what interrogations repeated. For the Americans, the greater shock was not the weapon, but the regime's use of children. Shock equaled moral injury. Reports noted the reaction inside units. Tank crews demanded tighter infantry cover after the incident. Some refused to advance without riflemen screening every corner. One ambush equaled a change in tactics. The boys' stand circulated beyond the battlefield. Higher command received reports highlighting youthful operators and the risks they posed. His single shot forced discussion at staff tables. One child equaled a tactical memo. For the Americans, the result was clear: a column delayed, a tank disabled, but also a line crossed. Now the war showed its final distortion. One battlefield equaled exploitation of youth. By nightfall, the scattered men regrouped in a nearby wood. Out of the 30 who had crossed the street, barely half remained. 15 survivors equaled one broken company. They moved west, guided by instinct more than orders. The lieutenant who had led earlier was missing. Leadership dissolved in the forest. Officers lost equaled silence in ranks. Interrogation, 116th Panzer Division, April 1945. Units dissolved. Men moved individually toward American lines. This matched their path. They no longer acted as a platoon, but as clusters of stragglers. One pocket equaled many fragments. Some reached a stream and drank from it directly, too exhausted to care about cover. Their boots were torn, uniforms stained. For the boy, thirst was stronger than fear. Hunger equaled weakness. As dawn came, they stumbled into abandoned farmhouses. Some searched for bread, others for shoes. Weapons were few. Most had been thrown away during the escape. One farmhouse equaled one supply depot. Later counts confirmed that more than a dozen from the group entered American captivity in the following days. The boy was among them. For him, survival meant surrender. Survival equaled captivity. POW Administration Note, May 1945. Underage detainees often released within days. That policy explained why some boys quickly disappeared from records. For the boy, it meant he lived when others vanished. Policy equaled release. What remained of the unit was no longer a unit. The war had stripped it of officers, weapons, and orders. One stand equaled temporary survival, not victory. The boy crossed into captivity with his group. Guards separated him quickly, noting his age and size. His coat hung loose, his boots barely tied. Child equaled prisoner. At the registration desk, clerks filled out a single form. Name, estimated age, unit, and place of capture were written, then filed away. His entry fit on one line. One page equaled one erased identity. POW Administration Note, Rheinwiesenlager, May 1945. Juveniles under 16 released within days. That policy applied directly to him. Unlike officers, he faced no prolonged questioning. Policy equaled release. The men who had followed him stayed behind barbed wire for months. They were sent to farms, mines, and rubble clearing details. He was excluded from such work. Time equaled advantage. In camp, he was placed with other underage detainees. Witnesses described them as thin boys huddled together, some still in school jackets under military coats. One section equaled a children's barrack. Within a week, trucks arrived. Underage prisoners were loaded and taken out. He was among them, stepping into daylight beyond the wire. One truck equaled freedom. Freedom, however, meant ruins. Towns were destroyed, families scattered, food was scarce, homes burned. For him, the road home was uncertain. Release equaled hunger. If he found his family, it was in a country already divided. Occupation zones hardened, industry dismantled, cities in rubble. For a child soldier, survival brought stigma, not honor. Survival equaled burden. If he did not find his home, he may have drifted among millions of displaced persons in 1945. Camps for refugees, orphans, and returning prisoners were full. For many, no trace survived. Displacement equaled disappearance. Veterans on both sides remembered a boy with a Panzerfaust. Decades later, in interviews and memoirs, they recalled the sight more than the outcome. The weapon was secondary to the child. Memory equaled fragment. Historians searched archives, photographs, and interrogation files. Some images showed boys in oversized uniforms, others with armbands instead of tunics. None could be identified as him. One photograph equaled possibility, not proof. In the end, he remained part of a number. 6 million Panzerfausts produced, thousands fired, hundreds by boys. His act was one among them, yet his figure endured in testimony. One act equaled one legacy.